Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. A special thanks to my friend and where is he? Ronnie, there he is, to my friend and former colleague Ronnie Chatterjee and Duke University for their partnership on today's event, and to the Economic Development Administration for their financial support and collaboration. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Cecilia Rouse. I am the newish president, I don't know how long I get to say that, president of the Brookings Institution. Before Brookings, I served as chair of President Biden's Council of Economic Advisors from 2001 to 2023. For those 2 years, we saw a series of landmark bills to invest in the United States, starting with the American Rescue Act in March of 2021, continuing at the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that November, and followed by the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act in August of 2022. These bills together represent a multi-trillion-dollar federal investment into local communities. However, given the wide range of economic circumstances across a big and diverse country, local communities had very different starting points when it came to these place-based investments. This brings us to today's event, which will explore how federal, state, and local leaders are working to utilize federal funding to improve economic and social outcomes in parts of the country left behind in recent waves of growth. Before we begin this morning's program, however, I wanted to say a few words about new research that Brookings Metro is releasing today, which focuses on the early implementation of the EDA's $1 billion Build Back Better Regional Challenge Program. Through in-depth case studies on 7 regional coalitions, the research documents what it actually takes to pull off major place-based program in real time, with the hope that those lessons can be used by implementers across the country now, not 5 years from now. In an era when the feds are relying on local and state implementation of trillions of dollars, timely and exemplary research like this is just so vital. And that is really the main thrust of the program this morning, during which we will hear firsthand from regional and state leaders participating in these federal efforts. But first, we will get the perspective of a key federal architect of place-based economic policies, Alejandra Castillo, the Assistant Secretary of Commerce of the U.S. for the U.S. Economic Development Administration, who will be in conversation with our own Zav Briggs, a senior fellow at Brookings Metro. Please join me in welcoming our speakers to the stage.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Administrator Castillo, thank you for joining us.
Please call me Alejandra. You and I have been friends for almost 30 years.
This is true. Alejandra, thank you. It's wonderful to be in this conversation.
Absolutely.
I'm going to add just a quick minute to what Dr. Rouse shared about the historic levels of federal investment we're seeing. The Biden-Harris administration and Congress, in several instances on a bipartisan basis, has ushered in a really historic level of investment overall. It's in many things, including infrastructure and clean energy and talent and much more. Some of this investment is focused on regions and their economic fortunes, and it's very, very concentrated. And we're going to focus this morning on that. My colleagues estimate about $80 billion of what we call place-based industrial policy investments. An important part of that, led by the EDA, supported by the EDA in a variety of ways, and focused on, we find, helping regions that have lagged the nation's economic innovation-led growth in many ways, a disproportionate amount of it going to distressed counties, and catalyzing enormous amounts of private investment, too, to help these regions capture a larger share of that. So it's pretty exciting, but there's a lot of hard work. Alejandra, I want to begin by asking you just to sort of make the case, restate the case for place-based public investment. Why is it so critical in the larger spectrum of what the federal government does?
Sure. But before I start, I do want to acknowledge that this work is done with a team. It's a team of incredible civil servants, individuals who are coming in, trying to be as innovative as possible in this federal space. And I see so many of them in this room. And just a shout out to Alex Jones and Scott Andes and Ryan and Kevin Gallagher. I mean, it was a really all-hands-on-deck approach. So to answer your question about place-based, we in the academic and federal space use place-based, but I also want to make sure that people understand it in a more colloquial way. Place-based is the places we call home, the places where individuals, everyday American, live and work and raise their kids. I travel this country, as you know, Zev, extensively. I live out of a suitcase in many ways. And it's really getting outside to those places where have incredible assets. But for many reasons, the data really speaks about the lack of resources. So what we did with regards to place-based was to really anchor these programs in those locations. It's about geographies and demographies, right? It's about the geography of places like Wichita, Kansas, which I know is going to be is part of the research. The idea of how EDA approached this work, and as was mentioned, when we have to confront decades of disinvestments, decades of changes in our economic base, the absence of manufacturing jobs or those jobs that really created a community, we wanted to make sure that these dollars, which we received through the American Rescue Plan, $1 billion dedicated to Build Back Better in particular, we wanted to make sure that we were able to not tell them what to do, but really engage the community. So as you look at the way EDA has been doing its grants lately, it's been a two-phase approach. Phase one is more to elicit those ideas, and phase two, for those who are selected, is to develop the concept. But as I said, the Build Back Better in particular, which is the anchoring data that you're releasing today, has shown a lot of great progress. And more importantly, again, it's asking the community to tell us what they believe are their best assets, what they believe is the arc of the economic future. So it's a novel way because, as you know, government usually has told communities what to do, how to do it, when to do it. This time we've turned the table and really listened very closely to all of these different locations. So I'll talk more about the grant in a bit.
Alejandra, can I ask you to say more about lessons you're learning? As you say, a challenge grant, for example, is a very innovative, very different kind of approach. The idea is not to be top-down prescriptive. You ought to be in this industry or that industry, but really to spur the best ideas and often innovative relationships too, new alliances, new kinds of strength locally. The American Rescue Plan Act of the various bills that Dr. Rouse named passed about 3 years ago now and enabled the EDA to lead both the Build Back Better Regional Challenge Grant and the Good Jobs Challenge, right. Both of them very demanding for the agency, but very exciting. What are some, but there are folks that say, well, this stuff takes years and years to really change economies and really produce results on the ground. What are some of the early lessons and outcomes you see?
Yeah, so the American Rescue Plan, we basically had 1 year to truly push these dollars out the door. And if you know our secretary, you know that she was going to get that done. And thanks to her and her leadership and her vision, we were able to bring together a design of the grant, which asked communities to set the table, but make sure that every voice is represented at the table. And that meant universities, community colleges, that meant labor unions or workers' organizations, that also meant nonprofit organizations, that meant philanthropy. So what you saw was really an organized way of bringing the best talent a community has, the voices there, and making sure that we were anchoring it around equity. Oftentimes, these type of challenges are led by university sector, but we want to make sure that the individuals, the stakeholders, were at the table in parity and speaking about not just the type of assets and the pursuit that they were going after, but also making sure that that equity component was there. What have we learned? We've learned so much, and Brookings has been a fantastic partner. We've learned the importance of making sure that a variety of voices are at the table. Mm-hmm. We've learned that this two-phase approach is also helpful because we're asking in the first phase to just give us a concept so that communities don't have to invest so much time and energy. A strong concept. We've learned that the second phase approach also helps us with regards to allowing the selectees to then develop their full-fledged implementation plans or ideas. We've learned that it's really magical to see areas of the country that we couldn't fathom were truly working on certain areas. I'll give you an example. At least for me, Wichita, Kansas has been legacy aerospace, and they have a long history. And to see the proposal that Wichita put together was very strong. You're going to hear from Brian Dennison about what they're doing in West Virginia, how they're embracing clean energy, taking the distrust or mistrust of communities, coal communities that couldn't understand how they could make that transition, and having bold ideas that could actually help communities understand the transition from traditional coal communities to now clean energy. We've learned about governance, how important the governance structure is, and this has now not only helped us in terms of
the local one.
The local governance, yes. The governance of the coalition is very important, and that keeps stakeholders involved and engaged in the long term. So it's not just coming together for the sake of getting the grant. It's actually coming together for the long haul of the implementation part.
Alejandra, for folks that may not have a ton of experience or history in economic development, say another word, if you would, about what makes that unusual or unlike traditional, chase the employers with tax breaks kind of economic development.
Yeah, it's a model that it also reflects those stakeholders that have greater capacity. And again, I want to be very respectful to our universities, but our universities have been the one who have chased the grants. And that's great because they have a lot to offer. But what we wanted to do was to make sure that other partners in the community could also come in and have a role and a voice at the table. And we were able to fund, in many ways, that officer, that regional innovation officer, to be that individual that was going to keep the stakeholders and the coalition together as much as possible. Because as you know, sometimes people get very excited about pursuing the grant, and the implementation is where the hard part really. This is where it all hits the rubber hits the road. So that form of, or that format of governance is one that has rendered a lot of great takeaways, and that we're continuing to use as we look at tech hubs as well.
That's terrific. That's exactly where I want to go next, is to ask you about some of the newer programs. So in that series of big federal bills, the EDA was authorized through the CHIPS and Science Act, passed in the summer of 2022, to designate regional technology hubs, better known as tech hubs, and the Recompete pilot program. I know you're in competitive review on these now, so I won't ask you to, obviously, to speak about any particular application, but what have you learned from Build Back Better and Good Jobs that you're applying now to these new programs?
We've learned many different things, and if I can take a moment, I really think Build Back Better was like the prelude to tech hubs. And let me just take a moment to give you some examples of the successes and how we're also looking at these successes as it relates to tech hubs. With Build Back Better, we saw that we got $600 million in additional public funding, $2 billion in private investments, 4,000 people that benefited in terms of employment. And I can go on with regards to more data on that. What we learned was that this was the first time that the country had really had seen this type of economic development engagement. So it was new, it was uncertain. Yet the federal government was the seed funder. We started to build some predictability in investments. So with the Build Back Better, we saw that the states were excited, but they made public funding contingent on winning, or I should say, on being selected a Build Back Better. That has been very interesting to watch, that with tech hubs, the states are no longer putting some of their public funding contingent on winning. They're actually saying, we believe in these technologies, we believe in the assets on the ground, we're going to start to embed those into our state budgets. That's a big transformation. Yeah. It's a big learning experience, as well as the role that the federal government must play as a seed investor, but a seed investor that also signals that more dollars will be coming down the pike so that the private sector can get some assurance that this is a long game. Other things that we have learned is definitely the power of the coalitions. In the case of tech hubs, they're consortiums. We changed the name just to confuse you a bit. But it's the same concept. It's bringing together a broad slew of voices and people who are invested and involved in economic development. As you and I have talked extensively, economic development cannot be episodic. It's not a one-off. And it's not necessarily, or I should say, it's not done by one entity. It's done by a very broad group of individuals. Another takeaway of Build Back Better that's also embedded in tech hubs is making sure that we're aware of the wraparound services that need to take place. One of those wraparound services is workforce development. It's not possible to create new industries if we're not also making sure that we are bringing the workforce right along. And again, Secretary Raimondo has been very adamant about workforce development. And it's really the first time that the Department of Commerce makes a big play in workforce development. Usually we have worked side by side with our colleagues over at Department of Labor and Department of Education. But for the first time, Commerce is really making a big play because we are closest to the employers. So we know real time what's needed on the ground. So we borrowed from that both the leadership of Secretary Raimondo, but also understanding the needs on the ground, that we have to provide wraparound services both for transportation, workforce development, childcare, and building that awareness into the fold so that we can actually create an ecosystem that supports the growth of these new industries.
One of the keys to making inclusive growth actually inclusive.
Correct.
Creating those on-ramps, making it
Correct.
possible for people.
Yep.
In a moment, I'm going to take an audience question or two. I want to ask you a last question, and you've already begun to point us there. Sustainability of these efforts. Could you say a word about the importance of sustained financial resources, number one? It's not always assured in our system. And also, what kinds of things you'd like to see continue to develop within the EDA so that it's a capable partner for regions in the ways you've been describing? Sure.
So we saw the American Rescue Plan. It created a wonderful opportunity for EDA to lean in on economic development, to lean in on U.S. competitiveness. And then we received the tech hubs. Tech hubs is authorized at $10 billion, but Congress only appropriated us $500 million. So 5% of a $10 billion program. And Tech Hub is in the CHIPS and Science Act for a reason. It's really about U.S. competitiveness, but also about national security. If we're going to truly and honestly and genuinely create an investment approach for our nation, as I said before, it cannot be episodic. It cannot just be a one-shot. It has to be something that's long-term and sustained. And to your question, we need to make sure that Congress understands that if we are going to make this long-term play, particularly looking at new industries, looking at how to compete against our foreign adversaries, then this tech hub, as well as recompete, needs to be fully funded. I know that $10 billion sounds like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of the federal government, it is not. And yet, it could have such incredible return on investment. I indicated some of the return on investment that we've already seen just with Build Back Better, and that's $1 billion at 18 months into the program. Imagine if we could fully fund tech hubs and really signal to the private sector where the U.S. is going with regards to technology, including technologies like quantum computing, biotech. I mean, there's so much at stake for us, both in terms of our national security as well as bringing communities along. And I usually, if you've heard me speak, you will also hear me say that economic development is about our democracy.
Yeah.
If we leave communities behind, or we leave them out, or swath of our population behind, there's nothing that tears more at the heart of our democracy than that. So this is a pretty ambitious but necessary approach to economic growth, and it's a privilege to be part of the Biden-Harris administration, because as you and I have talked, I haven't seen this type of leaning in, really not just in words but in action. And what the president has done with the passage of these 4 monumental legislation is really important.
Thank you. Some of our colleagues have described the past chapter as a winners take most economy. We don't want to see that keep going.
Correct.
We've got time for a question or two, if anyone has it. And just be as brief as you can, everybody. Yes, ma'am. I think a mic is coming to you right now.
Okay, thank you. I have a question, multi-part question. With your community outreach and ensuring that the community is investing in your initiatives, do you have an equity lens attached to that outreach? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, so great question, and thank you. Equity is EDA's top investment priority. We have baked it into all of our grants. As you look through Build Back Better, Good Jobs, Tech Hubs, Recompete, as well as our traditional grants. Many of our Build Back Better selectees have an equity officer or engaged and involved. And equity means just, as a woman of color, I will tell you it's both a professional and a personal pursuit to make sure that as we think about how these investments are being deployed, that the individuals from the community are at the table. How does that look? It looks as, nonprofit organizations that have been doing equity work have engagement. It looks like making sure that we're not only bringing the lens as it relates to workers, but also as it relates to minority-owned companies that are involved. So it's broad, and I will say that equity in many ways also has a geographical component. We cannot think that rural America is homogeneous. There's a lot of things that we have to address in rural America, and a big shout out to my friend Tony Pippa, who I know is not here, but along Brookings has done a great job reflecting rural America. So yes, it's baked across the board. It's not a checking the box. It is really tested and implemented across the board. So happy to connect after this, too.
Alejandra, we're going to have to leave it here and welcome the next panels. I think this is a good place to stop. A reminder that delivering equity requires building civic capacity, not just industrial capacity in the traditional sense. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from the others. You want to say finally?
Yeah, one thing, and I didn't use the term properly, or I don't think I introduced but capacity building. And again, we've talked about this ad nauseum.
Yep.
So much money has come down from the federal government that we need to invest in capacity building, because we need to make sure that communities are able to absorb these dollars and implement these dollars in a way. So EDA created a economic development core. We have 65 fellows. They are actually in town today that are going to be embedded in organizations for 30 months to build that type of capacity. And that is, again, we're looking at this very holistically, and it's exciting, and what a joy to be able to be part of the transformation of our country. And I can't thank Brookings enough for the partnership.
Well, we appreciate you. Thank you for the work you're leading at the EDA. Please join me in thanking Alejandra.
Thank you. Thank you, Zeph.
what a pleasure to follow the Assistant Secretary and Zav, two leaders that I just admire so greatly. And I'm really excited to moderate this panel. Today is a really exciting day for Brookings Metro. It is the culmination of a 2-year collaboration with the EDA, looking at the early implementation of the Build Back Better Regional Challenge. That's a $1 billion effort. 21 coalitions received investments between $25 million and $65 million. And so today we're releasing, and we, I mean a big team, Livia Brockman, Glencora Haskins, Hannah Love, Rob Maxim, Mark Miro, Mayu Takeuchi, my colleagues, are releasing a series of in-depth case studies from 7 BBB RC coalitions. So in addition to the 3 that are on the stage here, you can find case studies on places as diverse as Western New York, California's Central Valley, the South Kansas region, and a coalition of 9 native-led CDFIs working in Montana, South Dakota, and Wyoming. So undertaking research like this, it makes you appreciate how big and diverse this country is. Each of these places aligned one program's resources to quite different economic and demographic and institutional contexts. But what's also striking is that there's some clear shared experiences from implementing a big place-based policy like this. And so the research being released today tries to codify those experiences into 7 discrete lessons. It's a recipe of sorts for designing and implementing place-based economic strategies. So I encourage you to check that out at brookings.edu. But more than anything, I'm thrilled that we have leaders representing 3 of these coalitions here today to speak to their own experiences. Before we get into it, it's important to note that there's still several years left to implement this program. So this discussion is by no means the final word on the Build Back Better Regional Challenge's ultimate outcomes. But rather, I think what we're trying to do today is provide a platform for exchange and learning, drawing on these early experiences to inform the implementation of future place-based programs to which the Assistant Secretary spoke. So seated next to me is Maureen Krause, CEO of the Detroit Regional Partnership, Brandon Dennison of Marshall University, and in his past life, the founder of the Coalfield Development Corporation, a community-based organization in southern West Virginia, and Manju Bhatt, a scientist and dean at Winston-Salem State University, one of North Carolina's 12 historically black colleges and universities. So, Maureen, let me start with you. Detroit, it's been synonymous with the American automotive industry since the beginning of the 20th century. But today that industry is going through a rapid period of change. How has the Build Back Better Regional Challenge grant helped position Southeast Michigan to expand opportunity during that period of disruptive change?
Thank you so much, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So the auto industry, as you all know it, and as certainly I grew up with in Detroit, is a very competitive industry, and that made our entire environment as a community competitive with everything we did. So I know early on I thanked the EDA for making this a regional challenge because we believe that economies, supply chains, and talent are all regional. So why not work together as a region? It's really sort of put the carrot out there for us, but forced us to work together as a region and with the understanding that our combined assets together are a lot stronger than individually. And that has led to great success. We had over 140 people work on this project together. Never met in person, by the way. It was all remote. And, but it really, now that we're back, seeing the intentionality in all of these really strong programs working together to ensure a customer journey that doesn't drop you off after your 5-week session or your 2 times counseling or whatever, but that we want to stick with you for future growth. That has been extraordinarily rewarding. We were excited to get the grant, but I was super excited to see our region work together so well.
And just say a little bit more about, a couple of the bigger projects that undergird the effort.
So we have a total of 7 co-recipients. My organization, the Detroit Regional Partnership, is one. We're kind of the central focus that everyone doesn't really report to, but we collect things together. So I always tell people we didn't get the whole grant. I tell my investors it didn't all come to us, but we shared it with actually 25 separate co- and sub-recipients. Just a couple that I'll share with you. So Techtown is in the city of Detroit. It's part of Wayne State University. They've for years provided really strong entrepreneurial support in the city. They've been very mindful of making sure that historically excluded communities are a core part of what they do. But we had other excluded communities that could benefit from their support, and that is primarily the rural areas of our very large 11-county region. Why duplicate the good work of Techtown throughout 11 counties when we can take what's really strong and spread it out? So Techtown is one. The Economic Growth Institute at the University of Michigan, they have been able to work with our, you call them legacy companies, but it's really companies that might be 10 or 50 years old. How do they make this transition from, we call it ICE to EV, internal combustion engine to electric vehicle, and beyond under this global epicenter of mobility? We wanted to make sure that companies throughout our region had support. And then I will just say on the testing side, entrepreneurs, startups don't necessarily always have a lot of money, but we have world-class testing facilities for mobility products in our region. We wanted to make sure that access was provided to all who were eligible to do their testing in those organizations. So really it was spreading out the wealth with existing organizations that were doing a good job and giving them funds to spread out their expertise and be inclusive in who was eligible for it.
Thanks. Brandon, you're here representing a very different region, Southern West Virginia. And so drawing on the EDA's investment, talk a little bit about how your community, which is really kind of the heart of coal country, is using those resources to transition its economy to one powered by clean energy, and in the process trying to address significant generational poverty at the same time.
Well, hello from West Virginia, or West by God, Virginia, as we call it back home. Just brief background and context. It's hard to overstate, if you've not been to West Virginia, the dominance of the coal industry for generations. It's culturally paramount. It's politically powerful. It's been the whole core of the economy for a long time, especially in the southern part of the state, which is where the Act Now Coalition is focused. That stands for the Appalachian Climate Technology Coalition. And along with a generational identity in a coal sector, that's come with a lot of generational poverty as well. So it's an extractive sector. And so it has created some good jobs, but the long-term and sustainable prosperity has not been there for a lot of people. And so we have children who are growing up in households and maybe have never seen a parent hold down a steady job, go off to work day in and day out. There's housing challenges, there's transportation challenges. So there's a whole psychological and emotional aspect to what we're trying to overcome that I think is a layer of complexity that might get missed in this. So it's a generational challenge. We don't want to take a generation to get to the new diversified economy that we think we deserve, but it's not going to just happen overnight, and it's going to take a lot of wraparound supports, and we have to invest in our people as well as our sectors in order to get there. So the Act Now Coalition, we were awarded nearly $63 million. To your point, which is important, coalfield development was not the recipient of all of that funding. We have 24 different sub-awardees to which the funds were shared. So it's a truly bottom-up and collaborative approach. The governance is crucial to make all of that work. It's actually 8 different independent projects that are bundled together towards this vision of what once was coal country becoming climate resilience country, climate technology country. Some folks are surprised by that assertion, by the boldness of that vision, but actually we're building off some interesting comparative advantages that we have as a region. One is we speak energy. We're energy workers. We're not afraid to do the work out in the heat and the cold and 4 seasons and the elements to create energy. We're one of the few states on the Eastern Panhandle that's an energy exporter, meaning we have the infrastructure and the power lines, frankly, to export energy. It's just now we're trying to diversify the kinds of energy, the forms of energy that we are sending out up and down the East Coast. So we think we can do it. The early signs are good. We're coming up on halfway. We've created over 400 new full-time jobs through this initiative. We've trained over 500 new workers in these sustainable fields. And we're well on our way, but we've got a long way to go. One thing I want to emphasize is that human element. So we're really trying to support communities that are dealing with legitimate trauma. Even before COVID, if you go to Mingo County in the southern coalfields of West Virginia, 20% plus unemployment around 2015, 2016, in conjunction with a rapid decline in the coal industry. We're the heart of the coal country. We're also where many people would say the opioid crisis started, that's gripping the rest of this country now. We've seen this, just families, neighborhoods, hollers ripped apart by an addiction crisis. And all of this ties together, as the Assistant Secretary said, the health problems, the democracy concerns, the economic problems. So to respond to this, Coalfield Development created a workforce development model we call the 33-6-3 model. So it's how we organize the work week. First, we create real jobs, which is crucial, 33 hours of paid work, but then 6 hours of higher education, usually with a community college. So there's a long-term trajectory and a career pathway. 3 hours of what we call personal development. So we're carving out 3 hours every single week just to support human beings in stabilizing and eventually thriving. And so that's how we try to account for that human element.
And the dollars from challenge grants like this complement other federal policies, like the tax incentive, say, in the Inflation Reduction Act, is unleashing billions of dollars in investment in your state. But there's not always the flexible money to do the type of programmatic work that you just described. So it's important that to prepare for that wave of billions, you have this flexible money.
The 6 and the 3 are the most important aspect of our model. It's also some of the hardest elements to fund,
right,
believe it or not, because it's hard to describe on a grant application line item supporting a human being with transportation, childcare, trauma recovery, peer recovery. That doesn't fit neatly into a federal line item, but we've got to get more flexible to make sure that those needs are accounted for.
And so, Manju, this is a good segue to the work that you're doing. So the state of North Carolina is experiencing, by all accounts, a life sciences investment boom. And employers are looking for young talent to fill those jobs, but they're struggling. So why are HBCUs and other higher education institutions that you're working with so important in building that talent base, and how is the Build Back Better Regional Challenge supporting that work?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Hello from the state of North Carolina, and greetings from Winston-Salem State University. Yeah, Joe is right. North Carolina has seen a boom in life sciences manufacturing industry recently, and it has seen over the years. That comes with a challenge, lack of workforce, talent. So the North Carolina Accelerate program aims to address that issue, to develop homegrown talent in the state of North Carolina, particularly from areas that are economically distressed. So in North Carolina, there are 100 counties. 80 of them are categorized as either Tier 1 or Tier 2 counties that are economically distressed. So how do we address that? So this funding from BBBRC helps in 3 ways. One is increasing the awareness in these communities about the opportunities. So I, as a faculty member, I'm known to say, we don't know what we don't know. So that's exactly the thing. So we need to make our communities aware of the opportunities. So then create training opportunities for the communities. So just creating the training is not enough. We have to make them accessible to the communities that we live in. So this is where the community colleges and historically black colleges and universities come into play. So this is a true coalition of partners between the industry that need the workforce, community colleges that already have existing workforce development programs. Now they're working to scale up with the support. Now the HBCU and historically American Indian University Coalition, it's a coalition of 6 universities throughout the state. So we are working to set up on each of our campuses training labs We call it short course training, hands-on. Eligibility is simple. All you need to be 18 years old or older, and all you need is a high school diploma. So you're eligible to train for 2 weeks on each of our campus. Then you are certified and eligible for employment in this industry. So just think about it. So our goal is to train total about between 240 and 280 individuals per year. And it will have an annual economic impact of about 16 million just from the salary they will earn. So why HBCUs? So you asked Joe, why HBCUs? So this is the first time this coalition includes only minority serving institutions. So we have 10 HBCUs and one historically American Indian university. So the key to success in this coalition is partnership with the industry, communication, and obviously all of this is anchored by the NC Biotech Center. It has 4 decades of experience doing this type of high impact work. They have the experience, they have the connections, they have partnered with the industry, they partner with the institutions of higher ed. So where are we now? We are in the initial stages. We just completed the training of the first cohort at UNC Pembroke, which is a historically American Indian university. So they are now starting the second cohort. At Winston-Salem State University, we are next. So our first cohort will start first week of July. So now we are ready and primed to scale up. So the next 4 universities are going to launch their training in the summer. And then we are learning from each other. We have constant meetings, conversations. So the NC Biotech is really good in bringing all of us together, industry partners who are invested in this, university partners, community college partners. So we are coming together, learning from each other, and then we are ready to go.
Yeah, and that, I think what struck us as being so interesting about this model is it's standardized 2.5-week curriculum that all you needed, someone told me, all you needed is lab space and an outlet.
Yep.
And everything else is being paid for. So it's very easy for these universities to say yes to an effort like this when there's resources and standardized curriculum. They just and the adjuncts too that are coming in and teaching.
Exactly.
So.
One thing that I want to add is, so we train our students from these communities that we are targeting. So we know them, we know the community, we know the families. So one of the things that we are trying to do is not only address the communities, but train our own students. As soon as they graduate, before they take an employment, it takes 2 weeks. So now they not only have a diploma, they have a certificate saying that I'm certified to be employed in a life science manufacturing industry. Then they go back and then serve as our ambassadors to spread the word. So again, so it's primed to scale up. And then like Joe said, it's a standardized modular training labs. You can scale up, you can scale out. Anywhere in the state, you can scale up in the state. You can take it anywhere in the country as well. So one thing that I want to add is the experience from the first cohort. As soon as we advertised, the interest not only came from throughout the state of North Carolina, from outside of the state. So that means we are doing something right. So
that's great. All right, we'll open it up for audience questions, but maybe we'll just do one rapid fire question here. So you've been at this for 18 months, almost 2 years now. For implementers like yourselves, people receiving these resources, what advice would you have to them as they were starting their journey on implementation? And then since we're in Washington, I'd be remiss to not also give the option to give advice to federal policymakers, administrators, as to how they design and oversee these. So any advice?
So quick advice, be transparent and be inclusive in all of your work. Every meeting we had, we said, who's not here? Let's bring them in next week. And that was very important. You know, to policymakers, and this is a state issue that I'm dealing with. Next week, I'm doing a big guest editorial about we have to quit looking at policy in 2 to 4 year increments because talent and businesses operate longer than that. I happen to fly in with our 2 senators in Michigan U.S. senators, so that gave me an opportunity to pitch all this work. They were thrilled to be on the same flight as me. Sure. But you know, the reality is things do not happen in terms of political office. Life is longer term. So we all, whether we're implementers or policymakers, have to look at things much more long term to really have the strong impact we want to have.
Yep. Similar to the Assistant Secretary's point, you know, episodic isn't going to work. Brandon, okay. Implementers and policymakers.
To the implementers, I would say you got to get out of the spreadsheets. So a lot of times it's a lot of money, and folks are nervous about that and should be. But you could just get lost in trying to plan every little detail. And the reality is 2 years later, the project is going to change. It should change if you're responding to what's happening on the ground. And to policymakers, I would say you got to help us get out of the spreadsheets. There's got to be flexibility. We have to make these programs tangible. And the quicker we make them tangible for real people on the ground, the quicker our communities will heal.
Yep. So yeah, that goes back to the governance point, the ability to iterate, make decisions together, course correct, and then the flexibility to do so from the funders. All right, you have the last word on this.
Yeah, from the implementer's point of view, I say build a team of coalition partners. What we learned was, based on our own experience, obviously life science manufacturing industry partners, because they have a stake in here, university partners, and most importantly, the community. So what we did in Winston-Salem is early on, we approached the city council because they know the community and they have a stake in as well. So we approached city council, councilwoman, so we invited them to our meetings for the conversation. So, and from the university perspective, marketing team. So it's so important to get the word out, because that's how we recruit students and trainees. From the policy perspective, I always think about sustainability. So this is a 4-year project. So I always get asked, what next? What happens next? So we have built the lab, we have the equipment, we have the faculty trained to teach. So one of the things I always think about sustainability. So think about continuing to support us. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 questions for our panelists. Who has one? Go ahead.
Question on the job.
Or actually, the mic will come your way.
Should I introduce myself? I'm Jean Whalen with the Washington Post. The jobs that the trainees are going for, how much do they pay, and will they pay better than, a job they could get at McDonald's or somewhere else without training?
A great question. The average starting salary is $55,000 for trainees. Just imagine, not just the salary. The job comes with the paid leave, the benefits, health benefits. So it's what we call upward economic mobility for the individual and the community.
Other questions? Okay, there.
I'm struck by a kind of a paradox. You want to think sustainable long term, and yet you have to have an immediate impact to get people on board. How do you negotiate that with folks?
That's a great question.
So yes, immediate impact is obviously getting the workforce trained in these economically distressed communities. So that we are working now. So the question then is, how do we sustain it for the long haul? Obviously, it's a university, it's like Joe mentioned, we have the space, we have been given the equipment through the grant support. So we have the teaching faculty ready to go. So we think one way to sustain is, from the university's perspective, incorporate this into our curriculum. So universities are known to educate and give them a diploma, right? Now, this is a different kind of training we are looking at, because getting the workforce ready to go, right? So we think we can combine the two in the long haul. So we are already thinking about developing curriculum around this workforce training in the long haul. Obviously, this will require our university buy-in, the system buy-in, the legislature buy-in, because we are a state-funded school. So we think we have a case to make
All right, we'll go Maureen and then Brandon. Yeah.
Yeah, in answer to your point, it's a great question. So I think obviously in the Detroit area, which I should have said, our program's the global epicenter of mobility, right? That's what we call ourselves. But, you know, we've learned our lessons from the past. Our plan is to be proactive to what the changes are going to be instead of reactive. So we told the EDA, do not give us this grant because you feel sorry for us. Give it to us because we learned our lessons and we are planning for the future. It's happening very quickly, but we are being proactive to make sure that our talent and our entrepreneurs and our small and medium-sized businesses have the tools and resources to meet the moment.
Thanks, Maureen.
One of the really cool things BBBRC did design-wise is you can mix construction projects with non-construction projects. So a lot of times you have to pick one or the other, and construction projects with federal money just take a very long time. They just do. And so what we can do, we're working some very big, ambitious construction projects, bringing major private investment. The programmatic aspects can be implemented much quicker. We do it in church basements. We do it in community centers. We do it in K-12 schools. We do it on former mountaintop removal sites out in rural West Virginia. And so that was a smart program design that I think other policymakers might look to. So you don't lose the big, bold vision. You're chipping away at it, but you're also stacking up these smaller sort of grassroots wins along the way to build a sense of momentum.
I think that's the perfect place to end it. Join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you. All right, and now I'll invite our collaborator on this, Ronnie Chatterjee, up to moderate the last panel.
Good morning, everybody. Well, on behalf of Duke University, I want to thank my colleagues at Brookings, Alan Berube, Joseph Perella, Phoebe Copeland, and of course, President C.C. Rouse for collaborating with us, and all the entire Brookings team who's made this possible. This is a great event, and this panel is going to be about the CHIPS and Science Act and its impact on local economic development. For me, I'm Ronnie Chatterjee. The CHIPS and Science Act is personal to me. I was the chief economist at the Commerce Department while the bill was being formulated, and then was the White House CHIPS coordinator. And so when we talk about implementing the CHIPS program at the White House and at Commerce, it was often framed in terms of national security, you know, why we need to build more chips in the United States of America. But as you're going to find out in this panel, there's just so much more to the CHIPS and Science Act. And one of the big parts of it is how it's going to impact local economic development. The CHIPS Act is going to manifest itself in places like Tulsa, upstate New York, and Illinois. And we're going to hear from local, regional, state leaders here who are pioneering new methods to make sure that these investments for the CHIPS and Science Act actually come to fruition. And so I'll start with Kevin Eunice, who is the COO of Empire State Development. Kevin, the president was recently in Syracuse. And if you work for President Biden, you can pretty much say that with confidence at any time because he loves Syracuse, so he's always there. Graduated from Syracuse. He was in Syracuse for the Micron announcement. You also have a Tech Hubs project with Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester. How is your organization, which takes the lead on so many economic development issues in New York State, bringing all the stakeholders together to fully utilize these massive federal investments from the CHIPS and Science Act?
Thanks, Ronnie. Yeah, very exciting. That was, I think, the second time we had the president in town to celebrate the Micron project. You know, the investments by the federal government from, you know, what President Biden and Senator Schumer were able to get with the CHIPS Act, the tech hubs, you know, really were psyched to have that opportunity and capitalize on it. So without Senator Schumer, without the president, none of these projects in the CHIPS semiconductor industry are happening in the U.S., right? Without that CHIPS and Science Act. But without, in our case, Governor Hochul and the Green CHIPS Act, it wouldn't be happening in New York. So we passed a $10 billion program to bring these projects to New York. But we continue to invest in the regional ecosystem, right? Because I think, as folks have said, this is a long game, and it requires investment in all the pieces for success. So we're continuing to invest in the workforce, you know, sites and supply chain. If we're going to capitalize on this moment, We talk about 50,000 jobs potentially in central New York. Only 9,000 are coming from Micron, only 9,000. But the other 41 come from supply chain. If we're not able to capitalize and capture that supply chain, so we're making real investments in sites. We continue to make investments in R&D and placemaking because one, R&D, particularly for this industry, it's an essential input, right? Short-term, long-term. And then placemaking, we've got to have places where people want to be and stay, right? At the end of the day, Micron Global hires professionals. If they don't want to stay, it's unsustainable in terms of their work. So we double down on the full ecosystem. I want to say we have had great partners in the White House. We have had great partners in the CHIPS office. You know, these guys see the need to play the long game, to make the investments in all the different pieces of the ecosystem. So engagement with those folks on a level that's never occurred in my career.
Well, we're going to hear more about it, but I do want to go to Susan Martinez now at the University of Illinois, the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation. You know, Kevin talked a lot about the role that government agencies can play. Universities are also an economic engine and really going to be important in marshaling these federal dollars and making sure that we get the return on investment we need. About a year ago, Governor Pritzker launched a new initiative, Innovate Illinois, which is a public and private and university coalition to secure federal funding around a lot of key technology areas. Tell us more about Innovate Illinois. How's it working? And how are you bringing stakeholders together in Illinois to bring these investments to fruition?
Well, thank you, Ronnie. Yes, Innovate Illinois started as some lessons learned from some successes and some challenges from the Build Back Better program, from also the Department of Energy's Hydrogen Hub, where we successfully put together a multi-state Midwest coalition to develop the Mach H2, and also a nonprofit competition from the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, where we were awarded, along with Northwestern and University of Chicago, a biohub. And so I think Governor Pritzker saw how well the universities were working together. Myself and my counterparts oversee a large R&D portfolio, but also entrepreneurship, corporate relations, and economic development. And he looked to us to see if he could put together something where not only the research institutions, but also the two national labs, Argonne and Fermi in our area, were involved, the community colleges, nonprofits, could come together, row in the same direction, and develop something where we could work together to compete very successfully for these federal dollars. And it's not just to win the dollars, it's really an investment with significant assets in the state of Illinois that are not only physical, but it's also climate, and it's also the people. I'm just really, really happy to say it's only been around for about a year, just over a year. Myself and my co-executive sponsor, Brad Henderson, from a nonprofit called P33, have done a lot of the heavy lifting to put the coalition together. We received one of the National Science Foundation engines, which was really exciting. We've received 2 EDA tech hubs in the state of Illinois, a couple of the compete projects. So we're really excited about what we're doing, and we also have found that there's a stackable element. As we put these together, I think I heard a question about the paradox. This big impact comes from nucleating, and now we're starting to see it kind of explode and people coming to the table even more.
I mean, this is where that transformation opportunity comes in. You're stacking these investments from tech hubs, from Build Back Better Regional Challenge, from the CHIPS and Science Act, the IRA, the infrastructure law. You can get lost in the alphabet soup of this, but this is major dollars going to our regions around the country. The question, I see people nodding their heads and also shaking their heads, being like, how do you do this? How do you bring together all the government entities, local economic development organizations, all the universities? When you said universities working together, I also took a second look. I said, my gosh, how are you doing that? There's one other piece at least, though. And when it comes to that, Jennifer Hankins is going to help us on this. She's the managing director of Tulsa Innovation Labs. And the Innovation Labs was founded a few years ago to help the region in Oklahoma establish a foothold in some key technologies, what you call Tulsa's technological niche, which I really like. It's modest but ambitious at the same time. Since then, you've gotten a Build Back Better Regional Challenge grant. You are now Tech Hubs designee, so you're participating in these stackable programs we're talking about. But the really interesting thing you've done here is you created a foundation to secure federal funding. And that's another element here on the philanthropic side that I want to hear from Jennifer. How did you put together that foundation? What's been the impact of the Build Back Better Regional Challenge grant so far?
this has been a complete game changer for Tulsa. And I really just want to champion places like Tulsa. I think Assistant Secretary Castillo hit it well. A lot of places have been left behind, and certainly Tulsa and regions like ours, I think, have been one of those. So Tulsa Innovation Labs, we're unique. We are actually pioneered by the George Kaiser Family Foundation, which is a $5 billion philanthropy that invests only in creating equal opportunity for young children in the Tulsa metro area. What I really love about our approach to economic development that we're taking in partnership with them is, you know, as an economic developer, of course, advanced industries are the secret sauce to everything we're trying to do. The jobs pay better, the resiliency in them is higher, all of these great kind of equality indicators as well. But from the philanthropic side, you know, we can't just invest in early childhood education. We can't just invest in placemaking. There's now this other side of the coin where we have to create economies that people are thriving in. And that's really where we come in Tulsa Innovation Labs and our piece of that. And so for these grants and why we're really challenged by the philanthropy to take a swing at them, one, I think we have to start as economic developers coming from everything we do with an opportunity mindset. A lot of us are like, oh, I don't have a four-year institution, or I don't have a research park, or all of that. In Tulsa, we're really trying to flip that paradigming. My team cringes when I call it this, but really Frankensteining an innovation economy in a place where you wouldn't expect it to exist. We do not have a four-year research institution, but by God, we have the best community college in the country. They are innovative, they are great partners, and then we also do have a four-year institution, a land grant that just provides us enormous opportunity in reaching really cool communities across our state. So we're really trying to think about this, like, what does Tulsa have? Well, gosh, in the advanced mobility industry, when we kind of start looking at all the data, we've missed our opportunity to close that gap, and the pandemic really ripped apart our community, especially when you slice and dice for communities of color, female and male participation in the labor force, and then we were grappling with the ongoing energy transition and how that affects our community as well. So what do we want to do next? And the Build Back Better Regional Challenge allowed us to do that. Not only is it time bound, right? Like, we had to pull this coalition together. We had to set a course for the future. And then also, you know, stakeholders really like dollars. So it was like really this perfect recipe that allowed us to really push ourselves over the edge. And for tech hubs, what we really thought of is, for Build Back Better, you know, it kind of put us on the national playing field, right? Like, create these building blocks that you need in an innovation economy. But in tech hubs, really what I'm care about is, like, my competition's not Oklahoma City. It's not down the turnpike. It's not in the state next to me. I think EDA has gotten really, really sharp in making us say, no, our competitor is the world. And how do we get ready for that? And I think in Tulsa, we've done a really great job of saying, what do we want to be when we grow up, or whatever that may be. And so in tech hubs, we really said, here's us on the national stage, here's what we would look like on the global stage. And I think that really was a perfect recipe for us.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. That's inspiring. We're going to get more to this a little bit. Kevin, I want to follow up with a question for you, though. And I mean, the last time we made such big federal investments in regions was probably in the post-World War II era, and it laid the foundation for amazing economic growth. It's one of the reasons my parents moved to Binghamton, New York, where close to where you are. One of the mistakes I think we made, though, with those policies after the war is it was very carbon intensive in terms of the industries we were supporting. And the question before, you know, there wasn't a prioritization on equity, and a lot of people were left behind. In your work at the Empire State Development, how are you thinking about equity and also accountability for the companies that are receiving these benefits to make sure that there's an on-ramp for folks to get into these jobs, and also that companies are living up to their obligations to the community?
Yeah, thanks. You know, in terms of equity, it's something we've been focused on, whole of community benefit. And I think the thing we talk about in this moment is, it's not just the right thing to do to be thinking about equity in terms of giving opportunity, but it's also critically important to get the full workforce participating. You know, where are we going to get these workers if the full workforce isn't participating? So I think, you know, that's a really important sort of baseline, both from the industry's perspective, but also from government's perspective. As I said earlier, we created what we call the Green Chips program around the federal CHIPS program. And it's a $10 billion incentive program. The reality is we need to compete internationally for these semiconductor companies. We have to do it. But we do it in a way with two really key elements. We require companies to make community investments, substantial community investments, and to commit to sustainability. So in the case of Micron, it's a $500 million community investment fund that is invested, via a community group that we put together that drives the priorities around those investments. But most importantly, we hold, in order for them to get their benefits, it's not just jobs and investment, it's those community investments. They got to give us a plan, they got to demonstrate having met their plan, and then we give them their performance-based credits based on that. So it is literally in the fabric of our program, and it is baseline requirement for the companies. And we got great partners who are all in to do it, but it is clear it's baseline in terms of getting the benefits.
And just to know, this $500 million is real money in the communities I grew up in upstate New York. And more so, these wouldn't have happened without the CHIPS and Science Act being designed in a very specific way. I remember it was often people called something, it was the everything bagel when they talked about industrial policy. Well, I responded that everything bagels are definitely the best bagels by far, so I'm happy about that. But this shows you, right, the impact on the ground in Syracuse of the clean room at the Onondaga Community College that's being built, for example, one of the largest in the country, and the investments, the hundreds of millions of dollars the company's putting in to upstate New York. Illinois is another interesting place on the technology areas because it's not just chips. The Tech Hubs lists the legislation 10 major technology areas. One of them is quantum computing, which is a really exciting area here in the United States and around the world. Susan, tell me a little bit about why Illinois made quantum such a priority and some of the work at the Chicago Quantum Center and other areas, that's really putting Illinois on the global map as a center for quantum computing.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is you talked about universities collaborating, and quantum was really sort of the brainchild of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, University of Chicago, and Argonne. And what they saw is that there's diminishing returns on the advancement of computer technologies when you rely on silicon. So you need another technology. And if you will, quantum gives you sort of it's based on these tiny, tiny coupled particles, and it gives you more 6 degrees of freedom that's going to break through something called Moore's laws, which is capping out this. And the governor was very attracted to this. He saw that with an investment, he could create a new industry that we don't see anywhere else. And so he's probably invested about $1 billion into it at this point, including in workforce development, infrastructure, and ways that we can collaborate. Of course, that footprint with what we call the Chicago Quantum Exchange has really expanded, not only within the state of Illinois, but beyond into other states that have joined our network. This captures a lot of different sectors. We look to it with an eye of equity and environmental justice. We look to the labor unions. We look to strong community colleges. And I just think it's just a really important sector that we're going to see very much grounded in Chicago, but also pick up from the regions around it.
It's fantastic. And these technologies are all linked, I think, as you're talking about. And by the way, that's one of the best and shortest explanations of quantum computing that I've ever heard. So don't go to YouTube, just listen to Dr. Martinez here on this one.
Biochemist, I have to tell you, so I've been practicing.
It was fantastic. But if you think about the hardware and software that's going to power generative AI, the technologies that are capturing our imagination, it's, in terms of how we're going to produce these chips, both memory and logic chips, the data centers are going to be located in, and also how those are going to be powered, hopefully by renewable energy, quantum, and going beyond silicon to do things that we can't do now is also an important part of the equation, and we got to make sure these things happen in the United States of America, and that's what the CHIPS and Science Act is about. Jennifer, you guys are in a really interesting position, though, on this, because this stack of money, you're both in terms of implementing on the BBRC, the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, but also you're a tech hub designee. So you're in between these two in a way that's really unique for regions. And for folks in the audience, can you give some insight in terms of the lessons you've learned so far from Build Back Better Regional Challenge, how that's informing your tech hub's journey as well?
So many lessons learned. The one in particular, Assistant Secretary Castillo hit on is the importance of governance. And so in Build Back Better Regional Challenge, we took a really kind of a loose approach. And I'll say that in Tulsa, we have a blessing and a curse, right? We're a relatively small city, about 1 million MSA. So our bench of players is small and strong. And now the the disadvantage we find in some of that is that the bench is small, right? And so we really, really have to focus hard on capacity building in implementation. And that's really hard because, as I mentioned, while we have one of the best community colleges in the country, we have one community college, right? It's got 33,000 students, and so they have myriad priorities and areas of focus and things of that nature. And so it's really hard to keep people consistently focused and consistently eye on the prize. I think at Tulsa Innovation Labs, we do that really well. Right now, our moment in time is advanced mobility, right? Thinking about the future of air and ground mobility. Our incumbent workforce is aligned to it. Our industry base is aligned to it. And most importantly, the ambition in that industry right now is just huge. And so just consistently hitting our partners was, guys, this is our window. This is our moment. I know it's hard to stay the course. We have a lot going on. And so kind of in a looser governance structure, that's tough. And so with Tech Hubs, we actually kind of went a slightly different route. And we made a coalition that was about 3 times the size of what we did in Build Back Better. And I think that was really critical because we broadened from just local partners. We actually brought in a lot of national level partners too. And so I'll kind of talk about, and what I love about these programs is, again, like the creativity we're allowed to do to meet our community needs. And so that's kind of the big moment in time for us. And then as Tulsa Innovation Labs, we're only 4 years old, really finding our space and our voice in a lot of this and stepping into a role in kind of a vacuum that had been in our community for a long time as a group firmly saying, we do one thing well. We got to make sure that Tulsa's a leader in advanced industries. Hard stop. We're not doing any of the other stuff. These are the things that we do. So for these 2 programs, it's been really interesting. How do we build the local capacity that Build Back Better, really mandates us and challenges us to put us on that national playing field? And then now as Tech Hubs designees looking to the future of like, oh goodness, what is and how do we make sure Tulsa is staying on a national baseline and also keeping up with global trends? And how do we continue to use BBBRC as kind of that pivot, and that we use it as like a bellwether of like, wow, we built these programs pretty loosely and so that we can be responsive. We can actually now start kind of using them as a navigating tool a little bit. So Tech Hubs has been fun, and it's also like, goodness gracious, that's the globe, right? Like we're trying to wrap our heads around Tulsa, and now we're thinking about the world, but that's where we got to be.
That's where you got to be. Let's take, I'm going to ask one more question of each panelist, and then maybe we'll take a question or 2 from the audience and wrap up. Kevin, one thing I wanted you to double click on is the role of R&D. You mentioned it a little bit. Obviously, upstate New York is a major center for global R&D. And I think it often gets underplayed in policy discussions because it's super technical, takes a long time. People don't often see the connection between R&D investments and tangible stuff now, to the question that was asked before. Tell us about sort of where your vision is around research and development, how it might differ from supporting the construction and manufacturing facilities, and where you think that's going to go in terms of the legacy of Tech Hubs and the CHIPS and Science Act.
Thanks.
There, I think it's over here. You can use mine.
All right, thank you. So, history of New York's, particularly talking about semiconductors, there was a decision probably 20, 30 years ago. Somebody said, let's start investing in R&D. And it was very much motivated by the economic opportunities. It wasn't anybody saying, hey, let's help these companies get really good at what they're doing. It was, we knew how important that input was to this industry and how important smart people were, right? And so there was a decision, and that decision continued over the course of multiple governors, a recognition that semiconductor investment was critical. And frankly, it led to Global Foundries ultimately. They have a $15 billion facility north of Albany. Micron has just announced a $100 billion facility, and Global's further expanding. So it was very much driven by economic development. It was about people and jobs. And so we recognize that needs to continue. And I think it's even more important in this space today because of the capital necessary in this industry. It's huge money. A tool can be $500 million in these high-end EUV tools, right? And so very difficult for individual players to acquire these tools to do the research, and we help facilitate that. But all in the interest of driving those jobs and those economic opportunities for real people.
Oh, that's musical mics. I love it. Susan, I want to double click on one thing you said. You are getting universities to work together, which is really challenging. I mean, even getting faculty to work together can be a challenge, as you know. What's your pitch to faculty members? And we saw some fantastic faculty members up here before, Manju from Winston-Salem State. How do you get folks into the endeavor of the Chips and Science Act, tech hubs? There's so many ways people want to contribute, but faculty sometimes don't know how, and they're not organized to do so, and the incentives aren't there at the university to get involved with these programs. What's been your approach at the University of Illinois, which has a massive and esteemed research enterprise?
Okay, so I can tell you that University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is known for interdisciplinary research. I was a graduate student there in the 80s, and I didn't know as a biochemist walking down to the physics lab was an unusual thing. So there's something in our DNA that's just very, very natural. And I oversee 10 interdisciplinary institutes on campus. It's just something our external partners notice, whether it's the federal agencies, whether it's corporate partners, whether it's other universities. And I think that's infectious. It's completely infectious. And so when we reach up to Chicago, we're about 2 hours south of Chicago, but we have a presence in Chicago, the University of Chicago, Northwestern, and our sister university, University of Illinois Chicago. It's easy to pull them into that infection. And I think as a public land-grant university where we have public engagement as a cornerstone of our activities, I think that really comes from this piece of our DNA that's just inherently collaborative. Just like to speak to the community piece in central Illinois, because we have another tech hub, and this tech hub is based on the bioeconomy, and there is massive state investments that set up Illinois Bioprocessing Research Lab that has become in just a couple years a magnet for companies, small and large, from across the nation to come in and use this. So we're creating a bio corridor between Champaign, Urbana, and Decatur, which has very large companies like ADM, which are creating the feedstocks of the world. And you can see the community coming together. You can see accelerators being placed by community leaders in that in partnership with the university. So I think once you have that benevolence, but the benevolence has a goal. It's an investment of time. It's an investment of energy into a greater tomorrow. And you just see that bubble out from the land-grant universities and the communities that they grow around it, whether it's local or whether it's across the state or beyond.
Fantastic. And Jennifer, I want to give you a question from the online Q&A, actually, which is really relevant. We are listening to you on the online Q&A, so thank you, Brad, for this question. What's the secret sauce to getting local stakeholders to work together? I mean, you talked about a little bit in the green room. What's your approach? It's so difficult to get everyone lined up, everyone in the room. What's been your insights? And after we hear from you, we'll go to the audience here for some questions.
I think a couple of things. So in Build Back Better, it was pretty easy, right? Like the energy was hot. There was all this federal money pouring out, and so that one was actually easy. In tech hubs, I think what was really interesting for us to watch is one, the increase in ask from us. So it wasn't just, hey, legislators, I'm so glad that you're excited and want to support us. It's now, how can we get some additional investment and things like that? And I'll say these big opportunities are critical in that, especially in states like ours that do have fewer resources to kind of go around. So the one thing is that we've found successful, the big vision. And the vision is big enough that it includes enough people, but also doable, right? Like it's reasonable. Of course, when advanced mobility was popping around for us, people were like, huh? And then when we say future of aerospace, everybody's like, oh, that's us. And they see themselves in that. And so that's been too critical when we go to our legislature and to our federal partners as well, of saying like, this is what we want to do in Northeast Oklahoma. And when they see themselves in it, that is the key. And then when we can continue to go back to the partners helping us implement the community college, the workforce partners, the research and development institutions, and say, hey, remember, this is our North Star. It clicks for them, right? But you've got to be able to kind of pull people out of their everyday like lens and paint that vision and paint that picture and paint how they play in that and their role in all of that. So that's kind of been our secret sauce in Oklahoma.
Fantastic. Well, let's go to the audience, and hopefully we'll have time for one or two questions. Folks in the audience, these are folks with real practical experience. I see one up here. I'd love to get some questions about how to actually implement this on the ground, to Secretary Castillo's point of view. Go ahead.
Hi. So these are inherently risky investments. So we're in cutting-edge technology. So what do you think, or what do you worry about that can maybe not drive you to success? What keeps you at night thinking about the future of tech hubs in particular?
What keeps me up at night is definitely that continued momentum, right? Like, how do we sustain this energy? How do we keep people excited and bought in enough? And then most importantly, on top of that, how does my community actually reach escape velocity within that, right?
I can add to that on the momentum. There's the pace is so fast. The stakeholders broad, whether it's the farmers, the labor unions, the tech force, the other universities. How do I make sure that they feel that they're included so we can not only keep the momentum going, but really grow it? And the momentum, I think, is with all the stakeholders involved, is going to what's going to make us successful.
Yeah, there's so many things that keep me up at night. I do not sleep so good anymore. But, I will say to you, I worry less about the engineers than maybe the technicians. How do we bring the full workforce in? How do we let people know what we're saying it's sincere, right? People hear us say we care about disadvantaged populations. They hear us say that we're going to focus on these things. But we got to do it, and people got to believe it, right? And so we talk about reaching poverty in upstate New York. There's a ton of poverty, right? So having Micron succeed on selling chips, but also how do we get those folks who are seeing generational poverty and bring them in? So yeah, there's an awful lot of things that keep me up at night.
I think creating trusted partners is something that I think we all ascribe to.
Fantastic. So with that, I think I should wrap up. I want to thank our panelists who did a fantastic job, Jennifer, Kevin, Susan, and I also want to thank the audience for being here. This has been a great discussion. I hope we can continue to do these kind of events, both with Duke University and Brookings. I also want to say, growing up in one of these areas, IBM was a big employer in my region. And when it left, the question was always, what's the future of upstate New York? And, we asked that question for a long time. And I'm sure they were asking in Oklahoma and Illinois. I think what you're seeing with these programs is the future is here. And these are the folks who are implementing it. And in that IBM factory where I grew up, they've recently been replaced by a battery manufacturer that has received a grant from the Economic Development Administration and is changing the world in terms of electric vehicles. And so I think if you keep an eye on these regions and these folks, you're going to see the future of America unfolding. And I've been happy to be on this panel and host you guys. And I hope to see everyone in the audience at our next Duke Brookings event. Thanks, everyone.